My name's Heidi. I'm an alcoholic. I don't think I pronounced my name well. Heidi. Sobriety date, September 8th, 1979. And I gotta tell you, I have a love-hate relationship with this kind of service. I have always had phobia about public speaking, you know, like about 3/4 of people on the planet do, right? Like whoever gets up here and says, I love this. But, you know, the reality is that I also love having the opportunity to talk about Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, for me and the years that I've spent here. It blows me away when I actually get to, go through that, what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like now. And I, about 3.5 years ago, joined a home group where anytime we have somebody new in the room, the topic is the first step. And I didn't realize until I sat in that meeting that I didn't spend much time anymore thinking about, what my story was and what it was like then, unless I was up at a podium, and that doesn't happen very often, really. I get invited a couple times a year, and maybe when I'd be working with somebody, but it wasn't enough, and there's just something for me about being in that meeting where we are all, always, sooner or later, at least touching on some part of what it used to be like. And I have glasses. This is the biggest group I've ever done this with. My first time I went shopping for eyeglasses, I wanted my daughter to help me pick out a cute pair, and I didn't for Warner, and we were at Target, and the first pair I slipped on, she freaked out, left, walked off, went down the aisle, and I blame it on her that I haven't wanted to do this in public ever since. But anyway, it may seem incredible these men are to become happy, respected, and useful once more. How can they rise out of such misery, bad repute, and hopelessness? The practical answer is that since these things have happened among us, they can happen with you. And the thing that the reason I read that again is because I absolutely marvel at what a can't say that next word, screwed up lot that we are, It just blows my mind when I sit in meetings, and my home group especially, it's a perfect meeting for me today. It would have been the last place I would have been in my early sobriety because, it's in the Southwest Portland, for God's sake, at the foot of Lewis and Clark College. That's not the neighborhoods that I was running in when I was drinking and drugging, and it's not where I would have sobered up. But it's so amazing to sit in that room of 60, 70, 80 people who, for the most part have fairly decent lives today and hear where we come from. Without exception, we are a sorry, screwed up lot. I mean, we wouldn't be here if we weren't, at least at some point in our sobriety. The other line in the section, this was the very first thing I ever underlined in my big book. When I sobered up, I was 18 years old. I dropped out of school. 6th grade was the last year I finished. I had a little trouble with junior high and high school. I didn't actually go to high school at all, so I didn't have any trouble there. But I literally had a 6th grade education, and the first time I heard the word resentment, I didn't have a definition for it. I did not. And so when I started reading the big book, especially the first 164 pages, I got very little of it. I went straight back to the stories. But this is the very first line that I highlighted in not this book, the previous one that fell apart. He cannot picture life without alcohol. Someday he will be unable to imagine life either with alcohol or without it. Then he will know loneliness such as few do. He'll be at the jumping off place. He will wish for the end, or she in my case. And I got that. I mean, and actually the line was, that no longer able to imagine life either with or without alcohol. And, I was there, and I was 18 years old. I'm Portland native. I grew up out in Park Rose. I started drinking and drugging at a really young age, 11 years old. My parents were older, late-stage alcoholic. My dad was 50 when I was born. My mom was 37. She had major mental health issues, and neither of them were fit to be parents. in any way, shape, or form. They didn't have the tools. I was actually an accident. My dad was supposedly sterile. The last thing they expected were kids. My dad owned a tavern out in Northeast Cully, and he and my mom met, and they were going to ride off into the sunset on his bar stools together. And that was New Year's of 1960, and I was born the day after Christmas, 1960. So a bit of a surprise, not what they'd expected. And, I tell you that not because it's part of my history, it's part of who I am. I believe that, the upbringing that I had really accelerated the age at which I started drinking and how quickly, well, the 70s also probably had something to do with how quickly I got here, but I know enough about my personality, having studied myself seriously throughout my sobriety, to know that, God, I'm so alcoholic. I'm alcoholic to my core. And today I'm alcoholic to my core. And I would have been that way regardless of where you dropped me. So there you have it. Drinking and drugging, I loved it from the very first. I mean, I don't, one of the first or second time I drank, I don't even remember which time it was, but we were drinking with a bunch of buddies out at the Sand Pit, used to be the Sandy Boulevard Theater, and Mark knows it. It's part of the reason I brought him up here, because he's from my old neighborhood. Not that we ever partied together, but although we might have, you never know. I think we're about the same age, but anyway, I got so drunk that I had to lay down because I literally couldn't stand up. And, I'm with all, my adolescent peers, and I'm sick, and I'm, can't lift up my head, and I'm burping, and I mean, who knows what all, and a little bit later I'm able to get up, and, I think I slept that night under the bushes at somebody's house because I couldn't go home, and, hung over like crazy the next day and couldn't remember pieces of it. That was one of my very first drunks, and it never changed for me. It never changed. I mean, that was my relationship with alcohol from the get-go. 7th grade, very first day, I went out and got loaded on illegal substances and didn't show up for junior high for 3 weeks. Basically, I was running with kids who were at the local high school. They were older, and we had things to do, and it didn't include classes or studying. And, I love those people. They were 16, 17 years old. They could get everything and anything, and we did it all. And, I partied. I mean, I partied. I drank and used and partied. And it was a party. And I was walking today, long walk, thinking about what was going to be important to talk to you all about. And I was, it was really fun to be out there. I was outside, Council Crest, Terwilliger, just incredible places. Got a little bit of that adrenaline buzz going on, and I'm really feeling inspired. And I was so sorry y'all couldn't have been there, because I just had it all over the place in terms of what I wanted to say and what I needed to share. But anyway, totally distracted myself on that one. But a Jimmy Buffett song came on because I listened to music, and I hate his music. Hate it today. Will not listen to it. Always turn it off. But he was my party friend, in those days. He was it for me. I wanted to go to Margaritaville. That was I wanted to go live there. And I tried to once, took a road trip, and but ended up in Louisiana instead, ran into a redneck cop who arrested me and put me in jail my first night there, and I decided it was probably not a place I could be and left the state the next day. I've since this year been back to Louisiana and didn't get arrested. And I literally, I felt really good about that. It was my first trip back ever. 27 years sober. I don't care. It was good to go to a state I'd been arrested in and not get arrested this time through, But, and my point is, when I was listening to Jimmy Buffett going, the reality is I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun, you know. We were adolescents, we were in our teens, we were out on the river, we'd get in the car, which is a scary thing all on its own. I had fake ID, somebody else's, till I was 16, then I had my own. I mean, I was drinking in bars at 14 taverns, not bars, I gotta be honest, taverns, the Vault, the Graphic, places like that. They're all strip clubs today, but they weren't then, and we had a good time, you know, playing foosball and drinking beer, and you know, it was one big 7-year-long party, and I enjoyed the shit out of much of it. Oh, I'm sorry. No, you know, I love this meeting, and I really respect that, and I'm going to try and watch my language. But, you know, the other thing I have to say is that when I first got to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was in meetings with young people, mostly young people. Average age was about 35. You know, I was 18 years old. And the one redeeming factor of those folks, the only thing that I could connect to in those days, is that they still used the F word. So I've been very careful not to clean up my language in meetings, but I will try and do that tonight. So I keep distracting myself. Where was I? I was partying through my adolescent years. And, you know, it was a good time, and most of the time, you know. But there are always times when, you know, it would turn on me, or I'd go too far. I wouldn't be able to stop when other people were stopping, and, you know, I'd pick up somebody else's boyfriend, or, you know, I'd go home with somebody else and dump my boyfriend, or, you know, I mean, who knows? I'd lose my car and literally have no idea about where it was or what I'd done with it, and have to call friends to figure out where it was. And, you know, there were times when I realized there was something not quite normal about me, you know. And actually about a lot of my friends too, but, you know, I'm not here to talk about them tonight. And early on, my mother started talking to me about my drinking. My dad got me a beautiful little baby blue Plymouth Barracuda for my 16th birthday, and which was again the day after Christmas. And by St. Patrick's Day, I had totaled it in the afternoon, drinking green beer, drunk, and also totaled somebody else's car in the process. My mom at that point suggested to me that I might have a drinking problem, and I might want to consider sobering up. And I remember this conversation today. I mean, we were at the Galaxy apartment complex off Sandy Boulevard, and she was talking to me about this, and I'm thinking, but I'm still having fun. And you know, what I didn't realize till a whole bunch of years later is that I didn't have any big denial systems set up around that. I didn't try and convince her. I just knew that I was still having fun and that I wasn't done. And, you know, and the reality is the next 2.5 years were rough. You know, they were rough. And it got a hell of a lot worse before it got better. I was, last couple of years of my drinking, I was running with guys who were iron workers. At 16, hooked up with a guy who was 22 years old. And by the way, he just celebrated 20 years of sobriety in June, which I think is very cool. But, you know, goes to show the people I was running with, somebody who belonged in Alcoholics Anonymous. But anyway, you know, and those guys could drink like nobody's business. And I don't know what I mean, I was like one of their buddies. I wasn't out climbing around, you know, buildings and skyscrapers the next day, but I was right there with them in the evenings. And Jeff would go off on jobs to Eastern Oregon and Southern Oregon. 6 or 8 of us would go and, you know, drink all night. They'd work all day, we'd drink all night, and you know, it was good. And then I ended up in this little town in Eastern Oregon, and this place has so much significance. I mean, I always, when I'm talking about my drunkalogue, and especially telling my story, talk about this town in Eastern Oregon, Huntington. I always can't remember if it's Halfway or Huntington, but it's Huntington, because I've been back there recently, had a little excursion back, but I actually at that point, what I forgot to say is that in the fall of 1978, my mom approached me one more time about sobering up and really thought that I should try and get into a meeting, and I agreed. I don't know why I agreed, but I agreed. I thought, what the hell, I'll go check it out. We went to the Friday night young people's meeting out in Northeast Portland, and it was okay. It was an okay place to be, and again, average age of, I'm so grateful that there were young people's meetings around then, and it was really powerful group. I know Jim in the back remembers these, but powerful community, and it wasn't too bad a place to be, but I was trying to convince my sweetheart Jeff that he needed to be there too, and he wasn't having it, and so I went off to Eastern Oregon with him, one more job, and learned, tried controlled drinking for the first time. I love that I think, is it chapter 3, the more about alcoholism, all that stuff. Damn, this is hard. All that stuff that you guys try to control your drinking, I never get that. I don't get it. Like, what was the point? Why didn't you just do it, that was my philosophy. I was going to have it, and that's all there was to it. And I, smoked like that for a whole bunch of years, too. But I went up there and decided I was going to only have 2 drinks a day. Then I did that, miserable as hell, for 2 weeks. And then spent the next 2 months making up for it about 100 times over, literally. I was up there over the course of a winter. Within 3 or 4 weeks, I had hooked up with somebody from the bar and one of Jeff's friends over the course of a couple of days. The man who I thought I loved was humiliated and left town, and I stayed behind. It was a town of about 500 people. I worked in the restaurant that was connected to the only bar in town, which is where I was drinking. My best friend there was the 40-year-old bartender woman. We drank, we partied. She taught me about drinking in the morning. I literally was drinking every day that winter, and had bad DTs, which is not good when you're waiting tables. I literally used to go over to, tables like this with the coffee pot, and people would get nervous about that. I'd be approaching them with hot liquid and not be able to hold it steady. Or, plates that I had a hard time landing on the table, and Jeannie, one morning, thought that I should try beer and tomato juice, and that actually sounded pretty nutritious. For breakfast. I wasn't eating breakfast in those days, it was better than what I was getting, right? It was tomato juice. And it did settle me down enough so that I could work. And so I learned about drinking in the morning. Anyway, town of 500 people, 1 policeman, and I was a little bit obvious in my practices, and I also, because I was a big city girl, was taking stuff up there to sell on the side so I could have enough to use myself. I won't talk about what that is, but I also had lots of men in and out of my house, and the police was sort of suspecting me of dealing and prostituting. And I was only selling the substance, the rest I was giving away, and but he was watching me, and he started arresting me regularly, and I don't know, 2 or 3 trips from Huntington to the jail in Baker City seemed like, half a day away, but I think it was probably a 45-minute trip, and I decided I needed to leave town. I just, a small town like that didn't fit a big city girl like me, and I had to come back to Portland. But I also had a moment up there in the bathroom of that restaurant one morning. I think it was probably morning. I don't remember all the particulars, but I know that I was either serving a guy over easy eggs, or I think I was sitting and having breakfast with him, and he was having over easy eggs, and I was eating my Snow's clam chowder and soda crackers, which is what I ate every day, day after day, and it was the only meal I ate. And he was hassling me about not eating eggs, and I was getting sick looking at and thinking about the eggs. Had to go to the bathroom. And I was in that bathroom thinking, oh my God, there's got to be more to life than this. There has got to be more to life than this. I had just turned 18 years old. I had guilt and shame coming out my ears, remorse. I just felt, like a piece of crap. And I just thought there had to be more to life than this. Now, it was pretty imaginative thinking on my part, because it isn't what I'd seen growing up. It isn't what I saw with the people I ran with. But, I had a hunch somewhere out there, there had to be more to life than what I was doing. And I am convinced today that that was the moment for me, that was it. I didn't get clean and sober, but I think that's probably when I started moving back toward Alcoholics Anonymous. I had taken a big book up there with me, and remember, I'm the obvious drunk in town, and this big book my stepdad had given me, he actually started trying to sober up in the 50s. I had in the tallest closet I had on a shelf with the binding to the back, so in case anyone was digging around in my closet, they wouldn't see I had an Alcoholics Anonymous book with me. It was okay that I was publicly drunk every minute of the day there, but, a girl has her standards. And I left. I packed up and I left. And in thinking back, I know I left this house behind that I was renting. I know I left some stuff that I owned. I know I left plants. I've never been able to figure out what I did with the cats. And I just, to this day, still have horrors that I left the cats, And I don't know the answer to that. And I actually took a road trip this April with a friend of mine, and it was the first time I had ever driven through this part of Eastern Oregon, and I was, talking to him about it on the way over, and we decided we were going to pull into Huntington, Oregon. And, been, 27 years plus a few months since I'd been there, and, it was so amazing going back to that little, teeny, dilapidated town. It was so harmless and so innocuous. There just barely wasn't anything to it. And it's, interesting because, that has such a huge focus in my own life and my story and my sobriety and my bottoming out. And it was really cool to go back and see it, and there's nothing to it. Like hardly anything's been done in 27 years there. It's a lime mining town. So it's one of those that's sort of quietly going to sleep. But I did get a picture of myself in front of the bar where I drank. If anybody ever wants to see it, let me know. But anyway, I came back to Portland that February, March, something like that, mostly to escape the cop. And I think I probably had the intent of trying to get sober. My mom took me to the Physicians and Surgeons Hospital at one point. Oh, important part of my story. I was living with my mom and my stepdad. Mother was a couple of years sober at that point. I think my stepdad was 4 or 5 years sober. He was one of those that was in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous for 40, 45 years, and I think the most sobriety he ever had was about 7. But, my mother is 30 plus and I'm 27, and, it's interesting how that sort of thing happens. There are other people in my life who, same kind of thing, So my mom, I was staying there and, still doing what I was doing, drinking in taverns, ripping and running. One night took somebody home to their house, and my stepdad didn't appreciate it very much. We went down the next morning, and I couldn't introduce them because I didn't know his name. And he went out to his dump truck. And off he went. And, oh, God. Thank God for shame and humiliation. Thank God, because I know it's most of what drove me here. It is most of what drove me here. But, Earl said, I've had enough. Your mother can't go through this, and you have to leave. You have to leave. And I went up to the second story of this apartment complex and got in the shower. Surprising that I was showering, because I didn't do it often in those days, but I got in the shower and I just started crying. And it was so foreign to me to be crying. I mean, it was so bizarre. And, I couldn't believe this man was cutting me off, throwing me out of my mother's house, that's like, what's that about? But it was, another one of those catalysts for me. It made me get serious about trying to figure out what to do. And, soon after, my mom was trying to help me get checked into Physicians and Surgeons Hospital, into the treatment unit there. Late 70s, early 80s, treatment was a big industry. There were treatment centers everywhere, and it was really easy to get in them. Really easy. I couldn't. Partly because they asked me if I could stay sober for, 72 hours and come back, and I said, sure, I can do that. I have laundry to do anyway, and, I don't know, that was like February or March. Of course I was drunk that night, and for 3 days following, I got into some outpatient program, got a counselor who told me I could keep smoking dope, and gave me a prescription of Antabuse, which I took and needed to not drink. I don't know, is there such a thing anymore? Nobody knows what it is. But my dad used it a lot. He was periodic alcoholic, and he used to take Antabuse to not drink. Basically, if you drink and you're taking it, you get sicker than a dog, so people don't drink. And, it worked for him. I figured it'd work for me. Got on Antabuse, got a prescription of Valium, and decided to do it myself. I was, at that point, living on my brother's couch, and I gotta tell you, the prescription of Valium was a godsend, because I went into DTs and didn't know it. And being the good alcoholic that I am, I abused the prescription of Valium. So, over 2 or 3 or 4 days, I was, getting myself well with Valium and Antabuse and a little marijuana on the side, and staying at my brother's house. And I was sort of going to meetings, 1 or 2 here and there with my mom. We'd go, and I wouldn't speak to anybody afterward. April 13th of 1979, well, I didn't drink for about 2 weeks, relapsed, got sober again. Stopped drinking April of 79. Got a little more serious about going to meetings. I was going mostly to young people's meetings. There were 3 or 4 in the area. Hung out a lot at the Portland Alano Club. We had 11 o'clock Maverick meetings in the basement of the Alano Club. I was in a meeting yesterday out at the grotto that reminded me of home. People were smoking in the meeting yesterday, and some guy got up and threw shit across the room and stormed out, and it's like, oh, I remember this. This is just like home. And, a couple of my buddies from early sobriety were in the room, and, it was sweet. It was great to be there and have that experience. But I went to the Columbia River Young People's Roundup in September of 1979, and that weekend was pretty profound. I had smoked dope Friday night. I'm sorry I have to, I wasn't clean, and this is the turning point for me, so I do have to mention a little bit this stuff in my story. Went to this conference on Saturday, and you all have been to conferences at this point, probably, and I was at a hotel over by the Lloyd Center. I don't know what it was in those days, Red Lion or whatever. And, you got to remember, I grew up in Park Rose, late-stage alcoholics. Dad was a roofer. Very blue-collar and very poor. And, I mean, I walked in, I'd never been into a big hotel like that. Never been into a place like that. And I was just awed. I mean, awed by the spacious rooms and the red carpets and the chandeliers and this is a place where a bunch of the young alcoholics were hanging out, and it was really, really interesting for me. And that night, Bob Earl was the speaker and told stories that just blew me out of the water. And on and on and on. Great storyteller, he's a writer, 5, 6, 7 stories that just had all kinds of really incredible meaning to me. And that night, I hung out, went to late night meetings, hooked up with a guy that I'd been checking out in meetings. His name was Stan. Many of you know him. He's still in and out of meetings 28, 29 years later. God bless him. And we got to talking, and he had relapsed, and I thought he was 8 months sober. He'd been 8 months sober, and all of a sudden he isn't. And, I wanted to know what happened. He said, well, I was out with some friends and smoking a little dope and decided to have a beer, and one thing led to another, and it scared the hell out of me. Scared the hell out of me. And, I made a decision then and there I needed to stop screwing around. And, interestingly, the next morning at the spiritual breakfast when they did the sobriety countdown, I was the new person in the room and didn't know it. Didn't know it. That night, I went to my home group and raised my hands for being in my first 30 days of sobriety. I really hadn't gotten very connected yet. I'd been kind of going to meetings. I think I'm taking way too long on this drunkalogue. I hate that. When I'm sitting out there with 27 years of sobriety and people are standing up here with 30 years and 35, it's like, tell me what it's like now. I want to know what you do now. It's, I want to hear about that too. And, I'm going to do it short shrift tonight, so I apologize for that. But anyway, I got involved, got active, became a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm just going to summarize. The first 4 or 5 years of my sobriety were chaotic, to say the least. I did not come in here and get different overnight. I heard it said once that, you've been around a while when your sober log sounds almost as bad as your drunk-a-log. That was me, man, that was me. So, very first big romance, I was about 8, 9, 6, 7, 8 months sober, something like that. And, this guy walks into the basement of the Alano Club. He's got a gorgeous suit on. He looks frickin' spectacular. And I just thought, wow, and the fact that I wasn't interested in a man in a suit was sort of weird because, it wasn't where I'd come from, but what the hell, he was gorgeous. And, I started chatting him up, and he was on his way to Quality Pie to drink coffee all night because he'd just gotten out of the treatment center and didn't have anywhere to live. Yeah, Jim was his sponsor. He was my first husband, my daughter's father. There are a lot of women who like to lay claim to the sickest man in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'll wrestle you for it anytime. God bless me and him and all of us. It was wild. 2.5 years of not working and violence and awful stuff. You never would have known that I was a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, I was working in the kitchen of the Alano Club, and of course I was not talking about what was going on at home. I was not talking about it. This wasn't my, I'd done this when I was 14 years old. This was not the first time for me. I did not come in here and get different overnight. Long story short, we split up. I was just about 2.5 years sober, had a baby that was 9 months old. The day after Tony and I split up, I know I can share this. Rick, who came up and got his coin tonight, was the my next sweetheart the day after Tony and I split up. And Rick was about 3 months sober. And, it's like, God, I didn't come in here and get different overnight, and the reality is, and Rick and I have talked a lot about this over the years, and I was at his birthday meeting yesterday, and, we clung to each other like only desperate people can, and for whatever reason at the time it was the right thing for us both, and it gave us staying power. And, here we both are, many, 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 many years later. But, a few, within a year, 6, 8, 9 months, I was living at the coast. I had to get away. I had to go away from him, Tony, the ex, and literally, physically, had to remove myself and went to the beach. Was suicidal for the first time ever at 4 years sober. I'd taken a couple inventories at that point, but, it was mostly about everything I'd done and who I'd slept with and my drinking. And, those futile financial, I was 18 when I got here. There was a little bit of a wreckage, but, mostly the wreckage was what I'd done to myself. And at that point, I took a 4-step inventory like I never had before. And, it was the turning point for me at 4.5, 5 years sober. I was really, really able to start making different choices for real and for good. For real and for good. The next couple decades, that makes me feel so old. The next couple decades of my sobriety were, for me it was about, getting an education. I pretty quickly hooked up within a couple of years my second husband. We were together 17 years. We had 3 kids between us, custody of all of them. We spent a bunch of years just figuring out together, because he was 9 months sober when we met. I was 5. See a pattern here? 5 years. I don't think I do this anymore. I know I don't. Okay, let me be a little more specific about that. But anyway, so, Joe and I just spent a bunch of years together trying to figure out how to live in the mainstream. I went back to school. I was, again, 6th grade dropout. When I first sobered up, I'd gone back to college, gotten my high school diploma, done it a little dabbling in community college, went back again when I was single parenting Lindsay, took some classes here and there. I was in school for 13 out of 15 years, and graduated in 90 and 94 with a bachelor's and then a master's from Portland State University. I did a summer commencement in 1994, and I just got to go back there this last summer for my daughter's commencement park blocks of Portland State University. She just finished her bachelor's. But, I love the way those kinds of things happen. And it was an amazing bunch of years, and I learned how to go be part of the parent-teachers organization and raise kids, and I waited tables all those years that I was going to school, because it was the best way for me to not have to work too much, be home with the kids, support the family, go to school, do all the stuff I was doing. And when I graduated and ended up right out of the gate, like all those years, I couldn't figure out for sure where I was going to end up. I really didn't know. I didn't know. I knew it was the right thing to do, to keep going to school, getting degree, and had no idea. First job out of college, I went to work as a junior staff assistant to Multnomah County Commissioner. It was pretty cool. And that, for me, just opened up the door to, it's been 12 years of an incredible career. I run a little nonprofit, it's not so little anymore, nonprofit now in a neighborhood that's very much like the one I grew up in. The people coming through the door there are like my family and friends of origin, and at-risk youth, and I hear some of those kids' stories. And it reminds me of my own, and my mission has been about trying to create access to resources, because it's been so critical for me over the years. You know, what it's like today, I mean, that's part of it. I'm, you know, the founding director of that organization. I'll have 10 years there on November 1st. And I don't talk about this a lot, and I don't say it, I don't think, as an ego boost, because I'm pretty clear where this success comes from, and even of this organization. When I took on starting up a nonprofit from scratch, I was 2 years out of the restaurant business, had never written a grant or prepared a budget or hired a staff person. So it was a little ludicrous, and I had to decide really early on that that organization had a higher power of its own, and I wasn't it. And, you know, over a bunch of years, amazing things have come to pass, you know, for that organization, for me, for the people who work there in that community. I mean, it's just been this incredible unfolding. I mentioned that, you know, my daughter is, you know, just finished college. She is, you know, the life that she's had is so different because I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, it is so different than anything she would have had I been drinking and drugging. I mean, I'm not sure I would have ever even been able to raise her completely, you know. And it just, it blows me away. And I, you know, not that, as cool a moment this last couple months as graduation as, you know, a couple of weeks ago, she was talking to me about, you know, being back in Portland, because she got to go and move and live and, you know, do these big fun adventures and around college. And she was saying, you know, how important being in the back home is for her, and, you know, she just, you know, she's really getting to the place where the things that bring her the most happiness are spending time with me, spending time with Amy, hanging out with her sweetheart, and just being, you know. And God, I mean, that is the epitome for me of the promise of Alcoholics Anonymous. The fact that I'm on her list like that is what makes life grand, and the best thing in life, you know, is just amazing to me. My secret, big secret. And it's, you know, I've had this thing where I've been really careful about not messing with the mix. I'm very superstitious about, you know, this formula that I picked up on early on in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I heard it in meetings said over and over and over again. And it was, don't drink, go to meetings, work the steps. Don't drink, go to meetings, work the steps. I mean, I had it drilled into me. And that has been it. I mean, that's what I've done over a whole bunch of years. You know, I've been a sober, active, participating member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and sometimes sloppily. You know, that's the reality, too. There have been moments, you know, that hanging out in that abusive relationship, it was kind of hard to show up in meetings. I had about 11 years sober. You know, I was busier than heck. I was, you know, working for the parent-teacher organization and starting to think that maybe I didn't have as much time for meetings, and I see that happen a lot. I see that happen a lot. People who, I mean, you know, it's so easy. You know, we come in and get all of those, what look like traditional successes, and it's so easy to decide you don't have time for meetings. My lifeline, I mean, my lifeline is here. You know, there's no doubt in my mind that everything I have today and everything I am is a direct result of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's my story. I mean, there are other people who managed to put together bits and pieces and careers and family. That was not going to be me. And I still notice that almost every day, and it happens in the strangest of ways. You know, I'm in this sweet little townhouse that I live in Selwood, that I'm buying by myself, and I walk up to the big double refrigerator and get crushed ice out of the door. and I just go, wow. You know, I marvel at, you know, the power of Alcoholics Anonymous and the grace of God, you know, and what's been given to me over a whole bunch of years of sobriety. So thank you.